Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Plant Consciousness Commentary. I feel like I start this oftentimes exactly the same way as I start the podcast, Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. I think you just kind of get into this rhythm of the way that you should say things. And so you say it in that way. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Tigria Gardenia. I'm a nature-inspired mentor and a certified life coach. But more importantly, for what we're talking about, I'm considered, I don't know, for the last 10 years, they've been calling me the world ambassador for plant advocacy. Sometimes world plant advocacy, sometimes plant intelligence, but it's all the same thing. And today what we're going to be doing is what we do every week, which is super fun, is going through a new paper or some research study about plants and human plant relationships of all sorts. So this is my favorite time. It's my last thing that I do on Fridays. And it's always so exciting to do this type of commentary because there's just so much out there now. And just doing the research to get us ready for this call is a blast and a half for me because there is just so much now out there. And today we have a fantastic paper. So I hope that you're comfortable. I hope you've got something to drink because I've got some tea, I've got water. We're getting ready to go and just dive into this. And of course, once we're done, where does all this go? Over to the Naturally Conscious community. So the Naturally Conscious community is the premier online ecosystem for human-plant relations. And that's really where we talk about all of these types of topics. So you can head over to the Naturally Conscious community when we're done there and continue the conversation over there. Plus, there's lots of really cool stuff. We just finished our second meeting for the for the Plant Wisdom Book Club. So our Plant Wisdom Book Club, we read a book every 2 months, obviously connected to plants and nature and such. And we just finished reading, we're in the middle of reading a book by a Japanese author, Hiromi Ito, I think is, if I get her name correct, I hope I did. And the book is called Tree Spirits, Grass Spirits. And I have to say, I appreciate our book club so much, so much, because in this book club, I am able to really put the pieces together. I read the section that we read. I had a whole series of feelings and I highlighted, and then we get into the conversation and everything just became super clear. So I love our book club. In 2 weeks, we'll have our final discussion on the book, and we will start on Monday the voting process for our next book, which for me is always is such a fun thing because we have a list of like 60 different books to choose from. I go collecting them from the internet. And so, the Naturally Conscious community is the place where we have our book club, and we also have a creative writing group. We have so many different things over there. But today, as my neighbor decides right now that they're going to be screwing things in, because last night at around 3 o'clock in the morning, we had a massive rainstorm come through and windstorm come through. This morning, there was down trees. I live in a very rural area in northern Italy in Damanhur, and we had just tons and tons of trees that unfortunately came down. Roads were blocked, bridges were blocked. It was crazy. And I noticed that my neighbor had just a mess because the whole garden area had glass shatters and roof tiles that came off. I'm a Florida girl, so I'm used to hurricanes. So to me, this was like, it lasted about 15 minutes and then it was done. But for everybody else, it's like, oh my goodness. So the sky is still overcast. There's possibilities that there will be more storms, but hey, freaky weather. I think that is just what is happening in the world right now. So instead of that, we're going to get into a paper today that continues some of the different conversations that we've been having. So we've been having conversations on feminine and feminist ecology, on queer ecology, on the role of women when we did, for example, the feminist plants, the water lily. So if you go back through the different papers, you'll find recordings on YouTube. You'll find for sure, every single one of these commentaries that I've done for the last few years in the Naturally Conscious community. And then you'll find most of them also on my website and on YouTube. So you have plenty of places to watch them. And you'll see that there's this thread around the idea of how do we better understand ourselves in a society as women by understanding the relationship with plants. And so this paper that I chose today, which is really a chapter, I hope we have time to go through the whole thing because I'm actually really excited about it, is very much connected to that topic. And I think that there's going to be a lot of possibilities in this, in our conversation. So let me just cue everything up. I'm also been playing with, the settings here, trying to get everything correct. Like, look, I did another little banner that has a different way of looking of me describing who I am. What do you think? Do you think this is better or the other one that was more simplistic? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm having fun with it. It's all kind of new toys for it. So let me cue up this paper and let me share it with you. It is, like I said, a chapter in a publication called, from Representing the Exotic and the Familiar, Politics and Perception in Literature. And this is all about, hold on a second, I just realized that it's the view that I chose, which was not the view I wanted, is a view that does this jumpy thing that I don't like. So of course, what did I do? I lose everything. This is, never do this live because it always goes wrong. Okay, so let me try read mode. This is better, I think. Okay, I think this is better. I hope. Okay, so chapter 22. Oh, sorry. I just realized that the banner was kind of in the middle of the way. It's the way things are. I'm getting there. Okay, folks, I'm getting there. I'm learning how to do these things. So this is chapter 22, Plant Woman Encounters in Contemporary Fairy Tale Adaptations. Can you see why I thought this was an excellent title for us to talk about? Plant Woman Encounters in Contemporary Fairy Tale Adaptations. This is by Daniela Kato. And this is from 2019, like I said, 2019. And it's one of those papers. Let me see if I can figure out where I found it. I get a lot of different papers and I go through a lot of them. So like I said, representing the exotic and the familiar, politics and perception in literature. So let's just dive into it at this point. All right. Rethinking contemporary. Sorry. I was right in the middle of the book club thing, so I didn't really prep everything. I prepped part, but I didn't prep everything. So now we're here. I am back, and let's just start. Rethinking contemporary fairy tale collisions for a phytocentrism to come. I already like the idea of phytocentrism to come. What do you think that word actually means? Phytocentrism. Perhaps more than any other contemporary cultural form, the fairy tale adaptation is a privileged site for questioning the boundaries between the familiar and the exotic at multiple levels. Adaptation is used in a broad sense here to refer to the ways that contemporary works of literature and art revise and reimagine conventional expectations of fairy tale representations. According to fairy tale scholar Cristina Baquilega, adaptation can no longer be regarded as a literature-centered practice involving the exclusive connection between two texts at a time. Adaptation is a transformative practice that weaves multiple texts into one another, translating them across media, genres, and languages in a much broader intertextual dialogue. And such dialogue unfolds amidst the materiality of culture and its asymmetrical power dynamics, meaning that it goes well beyond the comparison of multiple versions of recognizable fairy tales to address the well ideas of womanhood, motherhood, marriage, nuclear family, and so on, across a range of critical discourses and everyday practices. This is, in her part, Fairy Tales Transformed. So another reason why I chose this, by the way, and I really, really wanted to address this kind of conversation is because inside of the Naturally Conscious community, it started in the plant-inspired masterclasses, which are a part of Blooming Sprouts, which is awesome. It's a continuing education series from my course, Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom, which is also in Blooming Sprouts, that you can go in there and participate in. And in those masterclasses, in the last one, last month, we decided that we were going to work on rewriting the Garden of Eden. We had, as a group, have been, exploring plant intelligence and plant contemporary thought and all the different aspects to try to move towards a paradigm shift, to really get us into the idea of how is it that I can start to understand the plant mind in a different way. And one of the ways, and the easiest and the best ways, is through literature, which is what we're talking about today, right? How do I see and how do I understand the role of plants in society, especially a new role of plants in society through the literature, through the arts in general? And so we decided to take the Garden of Eden and rewrite it through a plant lens. And that's what we're doing. We've done it. We started in the plant inspired master classes. We're going to continue it in the next master class, which is on the 9th. So no, sorry, excuse me. It's on the 16th. It was supposed to be on the 9th, and I had to move it because I was taking Matthias de Stefano. For those of you that don't know, the philosopher and I don't even know how else they talk about him. Philosopher, kind of activist. I don't know. And I was taking him to the Sacred Woods Temple in Damanhur, and so I had to shift. So on the 16th, we're going to continue our work with the Garden of Eden and the rewriting of the Garden of Eden through a plant lens. And of course, there's lots of discussion there inside of the naturally conscious community as we're doing this around the role of women. Because, I mean, you can't talk about the Garden of Eden without talking about Eve, without talking about all of the demonization of women. So I felt like this was a really great paper for us to get into based on that piece and that conversation that is so important to have. So contemporary visual artists in particular are drawn to the polymorphic qualities and possibilities of fairy tales, often finding in them a doorway into complex, dark issues of our time. As Jack Zipes, I think, explains, in a globalized world that appears to have gone haywire, isn't that the case? Isn't that the truth? In a globalized world that appears to have gone haywire, the idyllic and escapist impulses that were prevalent in artistic renderings of fairy tale realms from the 19th century through the 1960s are no longer tenable. Ever since, this perception of a world out of joint has led visual artists to create all sorts of dystopian, grotesque, macabre, and cosmic figurations that Zipes fittingly calls fairy tale collisions, because their works collide with past fairy tale conventions by engendering extraordinary imaginative narratives through imagery that compel viewers to question whether it is possible to lead a fairy tale life in a rapidly changing world that appears to champion ugliness and brutality over beauty and kindness. Yeah, that's already important. Hold on a second, because I realized that when I started this live stream, I did not, see if I can do this. I don't think it's going to, oh yeah, maybe it'll let me. I realized that I did not change the title of the stream, and I feel like it would be kind of nice for people to know what we're doing today. Maybe. So I'm changing the title over on YouTube. I feel like that's kind of important. Okay. Oh no, it won't let me do it. It will tell me that I have to schedule it for later. I can't save the changes. Oh well. Anyways, so we'll just keep going where we are, and we'll say, well, hopefully people will figure it out and they'll understand it. Not a problem. Okay. One of the aspects of our contemporary world that has been eliciting compelling responses from these artists is the relationship human beings establish with other than human forms of life. Indeed, through all its ever-shifting configurations in time and across cultures, the fairy tale remains deeply enmeshed in material worlds that connect human beings with animals, plants, fungi, often in a super anthropomorphized way, with them also being subservient to the humans, in an array of aesthetic and effective configurations. Hence, eco-ethical questions regarding how we think of, speak about, and act towards these forms of life cannot but engage visual artists interested in the fairy tale imagination. Fairy tale scholars, too, have begun reflecting on these environmental concerns in line with the radical decentering of human subjectivity and the concomitant breakdown of the human animal boundary that is taking place across the sciences and the humanities, particularly in the emergent interdiscipline of post-humanist animal studies. Trying to see if there's anything. No, it's just a citation. I want to make sure that there's not when it's a citation versus when it's something that would be useful, like a footnote itself. Against common perceptions, the more traditional fairy tale narratives tend to marginalize animals as mere ciphers, symbolizing human values and experiences. Yes, that's what happens. Such scholars have begun reimagining alternative context zones for human-animal exchanges in the fairy tale. Thus, Louis Seifert has drawn attention to the frequent motif of metamorphosis, animal to human or human to animal. And have you ever noticed, animal to human is considered a prize, human to animal is considered punishment. Like always, right? You get turned into an animal because something went wrong and you're being punished. Not exactly the right message to send if we want to create relationships. Just saying. In a fairy tales, as always, a way of challenging the divide between the human and the non-human. Tales of metamorphosis necessarily delineate what it means to be human and non-human through the experience of hybridity, whereby a character finds himself or herself between species. Much in the same vein, yeah, but when they're between species, that's even worse, right? Like you're what's it called, a lichen, like a werewolf, or you're something, and it's always evil. Like it's very rare that you're in between worlds and it's considered beautiful. If you know of any kind of storyline, probably somewhere in, X-Men or something, somewhere in X-Men, there's probably some great story about hybrid that is considered really positive. I mean, maybe Wolverine himself, but he's not really a wolf. He's not a werewolf. So it's just a whole different thing. It's a whole different model. Anyway, much as the same vein, Lucille Desplat has argued that contemporary fairy tale recreations introduced literary beasts as powerful agents of intra and interspecies relationships. Literary beasts that whisper in our ear imaginative ways of relating to different beings in non-hierarchical ways. Also importantly, fairy tale scholars have underscored the gender ramifications of these interspecies entanglements. In her study, From Dog Bridegroom to Wolf Girl, Mayako Murai shows how contemporary women visual artists such as Konoike Tomoko address the human-animal boundary by boldly reappropriating for women an animality that goes beyond the male-oriented, overly eroticized. Oh, isn't that annoying when they're just totally eroticized? I actually don't like anime and stuff like that for that reason, personally. And often misogynistic images that have characterized such interface in many fairy tale traditions and in mainstream cultural products at large. Yeah, the man's the woods guide and the girl has to be all dainty. Oh God, it drives me nuts. These creative reappropriations challenge not only normative sexualities and their deleterious dualisms, but also the very boundary between species. And yet, such analysts remain firmly zoocentric. Zoocentric, it is true. Zoocentric. Oh my goodness. I was looking up and there's swallows right outside my window that are just flying all over the place. Where do you all go when storms like last night hit? Sorry, I'm fascinated by the configurations. I'm also very deeply saddened by how few of them there are this year compared to the normal years. Like last year, there were so many more. It's just really sad. Anyway, sorry. This omission is somewhat and yet, such an analysis remains firmly zoocentric, that is, animal-centered. The far-reaching ecological and gender implications of interspecies relationships have not as yet been extended to the consideration of plant life in the fairy tale. This omission is somewhat surprising if we consider that anxieties surrounding the behavior of plants have been around at least since Charles Darwin's characterization of them as active participants in plant-pollinator relations gave birth to what Jim Endersby identifies as a distinct literary subgenre concerned with deceptive and seductive plants. Why are we so obsessed with always these types of pieces? Catriona Sandilands, another good paper that we went through, a few papers that we've gone connected to her, even claims that such plant horror stories form a tradition in which botanical monstrosities of one sort or another invert the accustomed Euro-Western hierarchies of life to wreak havoc on the human beings who are supposed to be safely at the top of the cosmic pile. To be sure, much has been written on the significance of forest and woods as privileged settings and theme setters for fairy stories. In Gossip from the Forest, can you actually hear that? Can you hear the banging from my neighbor? This is what happens when you live in the rural kind of areas. Anyways, in Gossip from the Forest, Sarah Maitland discusses the manifold ways in which forests have shaped our fairy tale imagination by evoking a sense of enchantment and magic, and also fear. Come on, let's be honest. In many of the fairy tales, forests are considered magical places you're supposed to stay out of because they're scary and they're evil and bad things happen. Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. That is so true, Michelle. Poison ivy in Batman, which is surrounded by bundles of drying herbs. That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that in like modern context. That's a really good one. So we talk about forests that are shaping a sense of enchantment and magic, which is at the same time fraught with fear. Okay, there. See, I should have just kept reading ahead. Her analysis is, however, unwittingly anthropocentric in that it focuses mostly on the forest as a mere backdrop against which to test human conduct and disclose the human self. The non-human inhabitants of the forest, which are the forest itself, because the forest is made up of non-human inhabitants. There is no inanimate objects inside of a forest. I think we forget that. There are no inanimate objects in the forest. Yeah, okay, some of you are going to say rocks are inanimate, but you know that I don't agree with that, so it doesn't matter. They're animate too. It focuses mostly on the forest as a mere backdrop against which to test human conduct and disclose the human self. The non-human inhabitants of the forest are featured mostly as providers of magical assistance. Everything revolves around human nature and other natures orbiting in it, more or less distant ellipses, to paraphrase plant philosopher Michael Martyr. Similarly, Zipf's study of the enchanted forest in the Grimm's fairy tales, though acknowledging the forest as the supreme authority on earth and often the great provider, winds up by reducing its significance solely to human interest. Another thing that often happens. The forest is, in his view, the singular place that belongs to all the people. It allows for a change in the protagonist's destiny and enables a social type to distinguish himself or herself. Hence, fairy tale scholarship, in a curious inversion of the proverbial saying, has tended to see the forest, but not the trees, nor the flowers and the undergrowth for that matter, and all the little critters inside and the lichen and the moss and the rock. I mean, there's just so much to see, and that all so much more that you don't see. In this regard, it is of a piece with a long-standing Western traditions descending from Aristotle's philosophy and Christian theology, which have relegated plants to the background against which the real action of the world plays. The vegetative soul, Michelle's having fun just listing out all kinds of different plant-based characters. So we had poison ivy in Batman. We have the whomping tree in Harry Potter. This is a great one too. But do you see a theme here? The vegetative soul, Elaine Miller contends that even feminist studies have largely failed to escape the persistent hierarchical dualism valuing the activity of an animal being over the putative passivity of vegetal beings. Carla Husak and Natasha Myers, one of my favorites, I love Natasha Myers, ascribe this to our tendency to privilege the encounter value of organisms that humans can hold in regard. That is, those animals with whom we can lock eyes, suggesting that the extensive distributed and entangling body of plants unsettle us. So true. Against such tendency, Miller argues that plants constitute a productive site for rethinking feminist subjectivity and distributing the above-mentioned delirious active-passive dichotomy in which the male is coded active and the female passive. We've had this discussion before in other papers where we've dove even deeper into this concept of the active and the passive, which it's not active and passive when you look at it from an energetic perspective. If you look at it from a kind of more spiritual or metaphysical side, and you think about masculine versus feminine energy, they're both actions. They're both in some ways active space. One creates, the other one contains. You need that containment, that period of gestation that happens. And that is the feminine energy, but it is highly active in a lot of ways. So I think active versus passive has outgrown its usefulness. Maybe it was at one point more useful, but today, not so much. And in Miller's view, the idea of efflorescence proposed by feminist philosopher Luce Irigaray, I always struggle with this name, provides a fitting starting point for this project of restructuring the feminine imagery, thereby affecting the possibility of a feminine subjectivity by way of reworking the symbols of nature. Irigaray's philosophical outlook on corporeity, stamped by sexual difference and attuned to the vegetable rhythms of the earth in our life, as well as to an array of non-Western philosophical traditions, may seem hopelessly old-fashioned in light of contemporary feminists and their focus on identity politics. Indeed, Irigaray's insistence that the biological fact of internal sexual organs in women and external ones in men shapes their culturally mediated approaches to the world, including how they grow and cultivate their subjectivities, is diametrically opposed to the emphasis on the social construction of gender now prevalent in feminist theorizations. In what follows, however, I shall contend that Irigaray's conceptualization allows for a radical work of de-exoticization. You say that out loud. Not just a feminine existence, but also a vegetal one that has far-reaching ecological implications. More to the point of this essay, Irigaray transforms the negative association of women with plants into positive possibility that is especially pertinent to contemporary fairy tales collisions infected by genders and species in the work of women artists. But before moving on to illustrate this argument in the next section, let me briefly explain some of Irigaray's key ideas. All right, let's see what these ideas are. In I Love You, Irigaray overturns the negative associations between women and plant by evoking pre-patriarchal cultures where goddesses were associated with the world of vegetation. One might well wonder if women are closer to the vegetal world than to the animal world, as claimed by certain ancient philosophers, and particularly by female cultures, although it is true in different ways. Could it be that in this proximity there lies an accurate explanation of their relationship to passivity? Women's receptivity would not be restricted to her relation to man alone, but would extend to the natural economy, especially the cosmic one, with which her equilibrium and growth are most closely associated. Her so-called passivity would not then be part of an active-passive pair of opposites, but would signify a different economy, a different relation to nature and to the self that would amount to attentiveness and fidelity rather than passivity. Attentiveness and to fidelity. I wish they would define fidelity rather than just put it a matter, therefore, not of pure receptivity, but of movement of growth that never ultimately estranges itself from corporeal existence in the natural milieu. This is kind of closer to what I was saying, right? It's receptivity and therefore gestation. And that's a very active process. It's true to form. It's true to form. And therefore, the idea of gestating and allowing space for that form to emerge. And that makes much more sense to me. In which case, becoming is not cut off from life or its placing. It is not extrapolated from the living, nor founded in a dead character. It remains attentive to growth, physiological, spiritual, and relational. As Miller remarks, even though Irigaray associates growth with the feminine, with nature in the way these figures have traditionally been brought together, for Irigaray, nature is not something fixed, attached to a sex. It is part of a hierarchized system that is legitimate by virtue of being presented as natural and inevitable. As such, legitimization includes an occlusion of bodily and its intimate relationship to the spiritual. It is precisely such relationship that Irigaray wishes to restore by reconnecting women and plant through the idea of attentive fidelity. I really hope that she's going to define this word, because I have the definition that's kind of that true to form perspective, but I'm not sure if that's what she's trying to say. A plant's growth is faithful. Okay, there it is. A plant's growth is faithful to its milieu to the extent that it is always rooted in place. At the same time, though, the plant grows by being attentive to the world's fluctuations and seasonal rotations, to the comings and goings of other creatures, as well as by straining towards the sky, which it enriches with oxygen. Herein is, for Irigaray, a model of fidelity we should aspire to learn, true to form. Okay, that makes more sense to me. Now we're getting there. It is a fidelity pledged not to the masculine, atomistic, and appropriative subject of Western metaphysics, which engendered the man of scientific and imperial exploration, but to the entire world, toward which the plant's diffuse and receptive attention is turned. Ooh, I like this. That I like so much more. When compared to animals, plants have, in addition, a non-oppositional nature that in Irigaray's reading spells perseverance and tenacity shorn of confrontation. Confrontation, and in this case, I would define confrontation as not being able to avoid. Because I think that we, again, have defined certain terms like fidelity, for example, but confrontation also is this idea of confrontation is having to go against something, having to, all the words that are coming to me are Italian. When instead, in this case, I think confrontation is having to deal with it, having to really face it. I find like that's a really important word of having to face it and deal with it rather than not fight with it, but just having to accept and work with it. This is oppositionality is shown in the plant's very plasticity, their form, which is why their indeterminate growth is always a growth within and a flowering with the other. Irigaray. The flower sways with the wind without rigidity. It also evolves within itself. It grows blossoms, grows back. Some of them, those I find most engaging, open with the rising sun and close up in the evening. There are flowers for every season. The most hardy among them, those least cultivated by man, come forth while preserving their roots. They are constantly moving between the appearance of their forms and their earth's resources. And I love this. They are constantly moving between the appearance of their forms and their earth's resources. In other words, it's a dance I do with I dance with my environment. And in dancing with my environment, I merge with my environment and simultaneously adapt to my environment. I change my environment. And I love this metaphor so much. It's helped me really realize certain kinds of relationships where a relationship should always be that movement where I change, I adapt to whatever relationship we're talking about, whether it's talking about intimate relationships or parental relationships. The best relationships in general are those where I adapt, where simultaneously the other adapts and the environment then also adapts. And if you think about this, let's take a traditional thing like a marriage. That's exactly what happens, right? You come together, you change each one of you sort of modifies, and sometimes you hold steady to who you are, sometimes you adapt, and your environment around you changes. Your home changes, the way that you interact with the world changes, friendships, other friendships, relationships with family. There's different reactions based on the resources that you're afforded. And I think this is a beautiful metaphor for us to really understand where getting deeper into the plant mind can help us change the way that we experience all of this and make it more fluid and natural. Ideas of metamorphosis and fluidity are thus at the heart of such ways of connecting feminine and plant existence. And they are, too, at the heart of artworks I will be discussing in the next section. Teasing out the significance of these connections for a more phytocentric approach to fairy tale collisions is the task I propose to undertake. All right. The fairy tale is in everything I do. Jana, oh, that name. We're going to call her Janaina. Janaina. Botanical hybrids in Melantropics. The works of multimedia German Brazilian artist Janaina, I'm not even going to pronounce the last name, are among the most original and provocative contemporary approaches to fairy tale inspired woman plant hybrids. Although they're quirky, lush images, although really, like where's the best? Where's the best? I am Groot. I mean, that's really the best kind of hybrid model in existence right now. Although their quirky, lush images do not contain explicit references to well-known fairy tales, they do recreate fairy tale-like creatures and atmospheres. In their intermedial orientation, these works correspond closely to a subcategory of fairy tale collisions that Jack Zipes describes as conflicted mosaics. Photographs, films, paintings, and performances that draw on an assortment of fairy tale fragments to evoke a sense of wonder, if not bafflement. In Janaina's works, there's this sense of wonder is often created through the presence of disconcerting crossbreeds between plants and women inhabiting a variety of land and seascape configurations. The artist's multi-layered visual narratives establish dialogue with a vast array of cultural intertext, ranging from the nymph of the Greeks mythology to the nymphs of Greek mythology to the Germanic imagination of the Gothic forests. No less significantly, Janaina draws as well on the vast repository of mythic projections and fantasies visited upon the Amazon rainforest by first world explorers, builders of empires, naturalists, and romantics in the 19th century, which Susanna Hecht and Alexander Cockburn so compellingly detail in their study, The Fates of the Forest. Curator Ricardo Sardenberg has aptly described Janaina's work, Janaina, we're going to go with it, work as evocative in the Victoria Regia, an aquatic plant that is common in the Amazon and constitutes the largest of the Nymphaceae family of water lilies. We always go back to the water lily when we're talking about women. We always go back to the water lily. Its large circular leaves with folded edges float on the water, and its flower tends to open at night. In European mythologies, the water lily is a flower that transgresses metaphysical categorization by fusing the vegetal, the human, and the divine in its etymological association with both the Greek nature goddesses, nymphae, and the Greek term nymphe, meaning a bride, which contributed to the formation of the Latin verb nubere, to take in marriage. In the Amazon, the flower has populated indigenous legends such as this one recounted by Sardenberg. A little girl loved the moon and the stars so much that she believed that someday the moon would come to get her and change her into a star. One night, the girl bent over the river to admire the sky full of stars reflected in the water, which hypnotized her. Diving into the water, the little girl turned into the Victoria Regia, the water lily. This blossoming of the feminine in a watery milieu, the symbol of metamorphosis par excellence, would see in this case, at least, that transformation is considered beautiful. I don't know. I mean, hopefully the girl feels it that way. She wanted to be a star. She ended up a flower. I think it's better. Would resonate, no doubt, with Luce Irigaray. It stands in stark contrast with Irigaray's counter-hero and counter-flower, Narcissus, with the daffodil, which is the very negation of vegetable growth in attentive care for the other. Janaina brought together some of her most significant woman plant hybrids in a 2006 exhibition at the Contemporary Art Museum of St. Louis, which she suggestively titles Melantropics. The exhibition consists mostly of performance-based photographs and videos featuring female models clad in lavish biomorphic costumes made of various colorful fabrics with rampant out-of-scale latex appendages and growth suggesting magical or perhaps even invasive alien origins. The kind of hybrid pod-like creatures that inhabit fairy tales and other fantasy worlds. The evidence of human anatomy is barely observable in these features. Hair covers faces, and the existing limbs are either hidden under the bulbous armature or blended with tails and tentacles. The creatures linger quietly in verdant botanical settings in an uncertain status of suspension, which is so appropriate for the Swamp Thing. Can I say, the Swamp Thing, when I was a kid, was one of my favorite movies. I don't know why. I loved the Swamp Thing, and I loved the name Alec, which is the name of the Swamp Thing. And I loved it. I loved Alec. Swamp Thing was, even though it was not a pretty movie in a lot of ways, it was not a positive story, but I have to admit, I thought it was fascinating. The Swamp Thing really, really got me. I enjoyed the Swamp Thing. So what we see intimates stories that may have happened or about to happen. As curator Andrea Green puts it, the photographs seem to be fragments of a larger, wholly possible film stills from a science fiction movie or documentation of a newly discovered species. The very title of the exhibition is full of significance. Melantropics combines the word melancholy and tropics. And according to Green, it refers to the epidemic of melancholy that occurred in Brazil towards the end of the 19th century in response to the radical social economic changes brought about by the industrialization and the influence of European romantic ideas. But the title evokes as well Claude Lévi-Strauss's famed elegiac travel memoir, Tres Tropiques, a self-reflective critique of the West's thirst for the exotic and irrevocable damage its colonial legacy has inflicted. Well, that's an image. Eesh, that's definitely an image. What? Whoa, whoa. There is nothing to be done about it now. Civilization has ceased to be that delicate flower which was preserved and painstakingly cultivated in one or two sheltered areas of social rich and wild species, which may have seemed menacing because of the vigor of their growth, but which nevertheless made it possible to vary and revitalize the cultural shock. In Melantropics, Janaina gives flesh to this ferocious, transformative fecundity of nature in which enchantment and danger are inextricably linked and ever present. Many of the works gathered for this exhibition were produced during Janaina's extended residency at the Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis between 2005 and 2006. Besides being a world-renowned garden, the place is also an international research center and a focus on tropical species. In a sequence of photographs in Melantropics, the artist gently mocks the Linnaean classificatory, which we need to mock. We need to mock, but we also need other examples. And thus appropriative frenzy that has long motivated botanical gardens in a manner reminiscent of Edward Lear's nonsense botany in the Victorian age. Janaina appends her pseudo-Latin Linnaean designations to a variety of woman flower configurations, such as Glandulitera maris, reproduced above, which is the picture we saw. Yet, in common with other visual artists that variously draw on the fairy tale imagination, such as Paula Rego, Kiki Smith, Sarah Moon, and Amy Stein, to name only a few, there is a darker side to her work. Indeed, some of her images evoke figures of aforementioned plant horror, which Don Keatley defies as which marks human dread of the wildness of vegetal nature and the wildness inside of ourselves. We are so cut off from our wildness. It's crazy. It's crazy. We're terrified of it. We're absolutely terrified of it. Its untameability, its pointless excess, not pointless, but whatever, its uncontrollable growth. Plants, Keatley elaborates, embody an inscrutable silence, an implacable strangeness which human culture has from the beginning set out to tame. That is so true and so good. So true and so good. We are just all about control and that wildness, those things that we can't control. Bad, bad, bad. Which is what we were talking about in the book club today, because as we were discussing what Ito's book, how what's coming out for her is that, you know, her society, her Japanese tradition, this is what we interpret and we feel is like constraining her. And so she lets it out on houseplants because she controls them the way she feels controlled. And when they're not beautiful anymore, she hacks at them and she throws them away. I know, right? My friend's cat just like, which is totally appropriate for where we are right now. While such narratives have been around since time immemorial, they took on particular intensity in the wake of Charles Darwin's studies on the astonishing devices that plants, especially orchids, use to lure and conscript pollinators. Excuse me, I gotta write this down. The lures that are used by plants. As pointed out in the previous section, this gave birth to a whole new Victorian literary genre concerned with seductive, deceptive, and ultimately rapacious feminine botanical monstrosities that go about indifferently destroying men, ruthlessly dislodging them from the top of the cosmic pile. So not a very pretty way of talking about plants. Such botanical monstrosities also found their way into countless visual artistic depictions of fairy tale scenes, ranging from the paintings of the pre-Raphaelites. Edward Burne-Jones' series, The Legend of Briar Rose, is a case in point to Disney's fairy tale film productions. Who does not remember the haunted forest scene in the 1937 film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, in which gnarled trees with the hands and faces of old witches assail a panic-stricken Snow White? That's what I'm telling you. Forest is always wicked. Sucks. Here we go, girls. Yes. Always wicked. Always wicked. Always wicked. Another disturbing dimension of these visual fairy tale representations, particularly those indebted to the classic European tradition, is their insistence in subduing the potential of certain plants regarded as particularly lurid to unsettle human beings. Thus, for example, the Brothers Grimm Rapunzel is a tale that begins with a woman's excessive appetite for a plant. Rapunzel, precisely. Rampion, as the plant is also known, is an autogamous plant. If it is not fertilized with the help of insects, it can split a column within the plant to fertilize itself. The split column will curl like braids or coils on a maiden's hair, and this will bring the feminine stigmatic tissue into contact with the male pollen on the exterior surface of that column. I'm going to read that again because that is fascinating and a great example of why some men are afraid of women's power. Rampion, as the plant is also known, is an autogamous plant. If it is not fertilized with the help of insects, it can split a column within the plant to fertilize itself. The split column will curl like braids or coils on a maiden's head, and this will bring the female stigmatic tissue into contact with the male pollen on the external surface of the column which the plant has split. Interestingly, though, in most versions of the story, the lurid side of the vegetal proliferation is suppressed and given a more acceptable symbolic figuration, namely through what fairy tale scholar Marina Warner suggestively calls the language of hair. Walter Crane's famed illustration of Rapunzel with its caption, "O Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down thine hair," is a striking example of this kind of figurative intervention. Jaina's Glandulitra Maris provided a no less striking visual narrative that runs counter to such repressive figurations and their underlying gender and species prejudices. By fusing plant and women in a new and unabashedly sexual configuration, it evokes, to my mind, Luce Irigaray's aforementioned idea of efflorescence, a metamorphic, fluid, and indefinite form of individuation that radically differs from the atomistic and appropriately subjectivity that engendered the man of scientific and exploration, of imperial exploration. And yet, Janaina's work is equally in tune with the work of women scholars such as Elizabeth Gross and the late Deborah Bird Rose. They are part of a new constellation of feminist scholars that is enlivening the environmental humanities through an engagement with biology and notably with revised Darwin. Their engagement is generating ways of thinking attuned to affect creativity in interspecies intimacies that form an antithesis to on the one hand, the way of thinking of Darwinian hardliners who see it as such intimacies, nothing but biological deception and exploitation of the insect by the plant. How come the insect's never getting anything good out of it? Because the plant is doing it? Like, seriously. And on the other hand, such new ways of thinking also constitute an antithesis to the misconceptions that have underpinned the aforementioned artistic representations of plant horror, associating rapacious plants with feminine behavior. In her beautifully elegiac essay, Rose proposes a whole new approach to aesthetics that not only illustrates Janaina's conjoining of women and plant in her botanical hybrids, but also has far-reaching implications for rethinking of art from a phytocentric perspective. I use the term aesthetic in non-technical way to discuss things that appeal to the senses, things that evoke or capture feelings and responses. I want to think of aesthetics in part in angiosperm terms, that is, in terms of lures that both entice one's attention and offer rewards. Entice and offer rewards. It's not deceptive. It is enticing and offering rewards. Both Rose emphasize the notion that the aesthetic impulse is profoundly trans-species. The orchestration of desire, the impulse to attract that makes trees, ooh, that one's interesting, that makes trees, I'm going to go back to this one, erupt into perfume and flowers, and birds into music and color, is the way of life in all its forms. So this is Verartem bulbosus. Ooh, interesting. Hence, human artistic drives are seen as having a fundamental connection to animality and vegetality, as they too are based in strategies of excess, display, intensification. And most importantly, recognizing that our artistic drives are something that we share with other species cannot but be ethically charged. In that, such recognition does away with the hitherto dominant view that hails art as the quintessential manifestation of human, or perhaps masculine, exceptionalism, and as the privileged outlet for the exoticization of nature. Yeah, how do we not recognize all of the creativity and artistry in other species? I've always found that interesting because we have so many examples of things that are done purely from that divine aesthetic, divine artistic creative sense. Like you can feel it, you can see it in all kinds of species, in plants and in animals. And in fungi, oh, come on, seriously. You know that is artistry. That is playing with colors and shapes and trying to evoke responses, which is what art really is. In her recent book, Choreographies of Living, Carrie Roman compellingly summarizes this innovative way of thinking when she points out that artistic practice is not a rarefield product of human advancement, genius, or handiwork, but rather something that has its roots in the excess of evolution and in the showy extravagance of sexual selection. I don't think it's always sexual, by the way, where qualities and forces are elaborated in the name of attraction, innovation, and becoming other. Is that always, I'm curious for you, is that always, do you think we misuse the term sexual, or is it just me that sometimes I feel like I'm prudish? Like, I just don't know. I feel like it's kind of like the word love. We use one word, love, to mean 1,001 different things. I feel like we use sexual and sexualize to mean 1,000 different things. I'd love to see, a wider range. But that's me. The phytocentric aesthetic configurations in Janaina's Melantropics enact such qualities and forces through highly subjective but also playful displays of sexual attractors, colors, puffery, and engorgement. These attractors show, in addition, that forms of bodily intensification in nature as well as in art do not hinge on notions of sexuality as biologically determined or rigidly heteronormative, but rather as a fluid process of becoming that brings all creatures into the shared experience of being part of a vibrant and vibrating world. Okay, that definition of sexuality makes much more sense in my mind, much more sense. And I still think we need more words. But I think we need more words for lots of stuff. Drawing on Roman's proposal for bioaesthetics, I would say in closing that Janaina's botanical hybrids dehumanize art by creaturizing aesthetics. That is, by imagining intricate ways in which the species may shape themselves in ever surprising combinations and patterns, beyond the limiting divisive configurations of the familiar and the exotic. Such creaturely bioaesthetics compels us to reimagine alternative fairy tale collisions in contemporary art that, whilst not forgetful of how not forgetful of how out of joint our world is, also remind us that a renewed sense of wonder is still within reach. I'm trying to see if there's anything else down here, but it doesn't look like there is. Let me put this into a different. I'm trying to get my so I can bring us back to the beginning of this so you can see the title again. Interesting. I found this really, really interesting. Plant women encounters in contemporary fairy tale adaptations. I'm so curious as to what you think about it because, first of all, it wasn't at all. You know what I love? I love. Okay, this is me outing myself for a second. As you all know, I have a wide. Actually, remember, I actually created a little banner for this. I'm excited. Hold on, let me use that. Let's see. So as you know, I have a bachelor's degree in music and music engineering, and I have a master's in Futuro Vegetale. And Futuro Vegetale was very, very much into the architecture side. So it's actually a master's of science in in the kind of architecture world. So it's very much design and social innovation and such. So there's many of these topics that we're touching upon that for me are relatively, I don't want to say it's not that they're new, but they're just different, right? They are extensions of what I have studied and they go beyond, which is what I love about them. This is what I love about them. And I think that this is amazing because it always means that I come in fresh. I've told you a million times, I don't read the papers that we go through beforehand. I want to read them here with you. I want to have my own kind of confusion also, and I want to screw things up and I want to share because I think it's important for us to normalize it. I have a lot of experience now because I've read so many papers and I've gone through so many of these, and I do now, swing around more academic circles in order to understand it. But many of these particular disciplines are kind of just outside. I'm getting much more into the performative arts, which we've seen, and live art. Actually, the next week's podcast is going to be have that side to it. And so fairy tale adaptations and literature in this perspective, I just, that's not a world that I know very well. So, and I agree with what, Jill is saying here. It's the thing I find extraordinary as we go reading these is really how all life is working together, and that how all of our disciplines, so many of our disciplines were born with this perspective of control. And that when we relinquish that control, that as much as when we relinquish that control and we allow things to express, then our interconnectedness and our similarities start to show themselves. And I just feel like, and we don't simplify things down to what we think the biology is doing, because I love how they say plants don't think, and even some animals don't think. And yet you put all these thoughts into their way of being, right? You define their intentions based on what you as in not you, but like the universal you, the scientific you, as in what the universal and scientific you thinks is going on, which is always survival, right? And biological survival. And I'm gonna connive, and I'm gonna lure, and I'm gonna be, I'm not gonna be honest. It's so much a reflection of our values right now. And I think rather than seeing the plant world as who we could be, and who we really are at a deep natural level. I mean, we instead try to see these reflections of I think we're just trying to justify what society has become, like, cheaters and liars and so many of these different aspects. And so we say, well, the biological tendency is to do that, and that's why it's so hard, and human evolution is to go past that, because we have to work past our own limitations of our own internal structures. I think that's bullshit. I think it's more of going the opposite way. We have to get back to our core essence, which our core essence is art and beauty and expression and wildness and unpredictability and all of these things, and cooperation, and there's just all these other aspects that we don't give space for, because we have convinced ourselves that the mirror of what we are today as human beings is actually the core essence that we see in biology. And I just think that that's bullshit. I just think it's bull. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true at all. And I find it ridiculous that we would think that when you look at the natural world, there's no artistry and beauty and expression and all these other things, and that the tendency is all negative. I don't get it. I don't get it. And I think that's the reason I love being a coach, like why I take so much of this information into my coaching, because I want you to discover your true essence. I want you to discover who you really are. I want you to be able to express your authenticity. And if you follow the norms that we're seeing plastered all around, that animals fight with one another, and that plants are these, just these non-thinking rote beings, then of course I think that deep down inside, my true essence has to have a whole series of controls. When instead, if I reflect into the artistry, the desire for a relationship, the desire for movement and space, to you nailed it, right? To give us a place to be totally who we are in totality with the whole galaxies of life, right? To be our true essence. So if we see the natural world for all of how this wildness has created the beauty that surrounds us, then we can't help but want to be authentic. Because if the natural world, if all these beings in front of us that are non-human are acting unencumbered and have created such gorgeousness and such nourishment in the world, then wouldn't that stand to be that when I allow myself to totally be my true authentic self and my true essence, I can create that level of beauty. I can become in relation and create something greater than my individual self. I mean, it just sounds to reason to me. And this is why I love all of my clients, because I get to be that mirror. I get to see how their interactions with the natural world, how seeing plants for who plants truly are and interacting with plants as persons allows them to see themselves for all of their possibilities and all of their expanded perceptions and their expanded awarenesses. And it brings about such beauty and expression and freedom. And that's why I love it. I love having these conversations. I love that we have a place like the Naturally Conscious community to have these conversations. And I love working with people one-on-one as a coach to be able to help them get there, to help them have that safe space, both in community with NCC and individually, to experience and express and to come face to face with the plantness that they have within and their animalness and their rockness and all the other things that happen. It's just, to me, it's so exciting. And I think it's something that I just think it's something that's so beautiful and important and such. So thank you. Thank you for being here, for being a part of this conversation. I look forward to seeing you in NCC, and I look forward to continuing this and next conversation next week, when we will look into another paper, and hopefully it will be as amazing as this one, to help expand our concept of what it means to be human by redefining what it means to be to connect into the natural world and to redefine our relationships with the natural world. Like I said, next week on the 16th of July, in the Naturally Conscious community, if you're in Blooming Sprouts, you'll be a part of the plant-inspired masterclasses where we are looking in this same optics to the Garden of Eden. So we're looking at rewriting through a plant lens, the Garden of Eden and redefining what is the relationship of the tree of conscience, and what is the role of this tree, and where's the rest of the garden? Where did the rest of the garden go? I mean, why are we not talking about the rest of the garden in all of this, right? Why are we not talking about the rest of the garden? We need to talk about the rest of the garden. So that's where we're going to be. I hope you will join us. We also have our Ice Sprouts, which is our community gathering, which is just a place for all of us to come together and get to know each other and talk and be open and meet other sprouts, which is what we call ourselves in the community. And so I hope to see you there. And that's it. That's it for me, Tigria Gardenia. Remember, resist the urge to hold back your evolving green brilliance. I'm out. See you next week.